Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on the redesigning of Grosvenor Square. It's great to see so many familiar names in the audience and some new ones as well. When we set out on this journey to rethink the role of Grosvenor Square, to transform it into a thriving place for people and nature, we knew we wanted to do this with our neighbours and other London communities. So since 2017, our aim has always been to create a shared vision between Grosvenor, our local and London communities, and the design team. And we've been so delighted that over 1,400 people have contributed to the over 4,000 pieces of feedback we have collected to help us shape the future of this iconic London square. We believe that Grosvenor Square could and should be the most outstanding green space in London, that it should be at the heart of Mayfair, and deliver significantly more benefit and joy to the communities who use it. Crucially, it should also be better for the planet. This evening, we're going to hear from the team who've been working alongside you to think about the redesign of Grosvenor Square. Following feedback on the initial design ideas exhibition over the summer, they now want to present back their developing design ideas. We're going to hear from Anna Liu and Matt Burnett from Tonkin Loo, Nigel Dunnett from the University of Sheffield, who's our horticultural specialist, Cordula Ziedler from Donald Insel Associates, who is the project's heritage expert, and Catherine Gregg from Make Good, who have been supporting us on the public conversation around the project. We want to make sure we have lots of time for your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Catherine from Make Good to set the scene before the team show their developing design ideas in response to your feedback and priorities. As they're talking, if you have questions and comments, please do put them in the chat channel. We really want to hear from as many of you as possible, and we'll respond to as many as we can during the panel discussion at the end. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I very much look forward to joining the discussion afterwards.
Amazing, thank you, Ed. So if I can have the next slide, please. I wanted to, and the next one, please. So I wanted to start this evening by really putting this event in the context of the overarching timeline that we have, which is actually, see, Ed didn't say next slide. So we have the team, and then I'm going to the next slide, which is my timeline. Thank you, perfect. So I wanted to put this event in the context of the overall engagement journey and public conversation journey that we've set out for this project. So we started back in March, and now here we are in the autumn. So we went through a big phase of trying to collect as many ideas as possible and put together a set of community priorities for Grosvenor Square, which we then shared with people in July, along with some of Tonkin Loo's initial design responses as we started to define what was going to be the route forward for this project. And then as we start the autumn period, we're really in a moment where we want to start developing these designs into something that starts to feel a bit more real. So that's what the team have this evening. But we also, at the start of another round of trying to collect further ideas and kind of dig into a lot more detail around the themes and the components of the project, so that by the time we get to the early next year, we're really in the delivery stage and we're starting to focus on what would a project be like that gets submitted for planning for Grosvenor Square. So next slide, please. No, as Ed said, the aim was always to create a shared vision for Grosvenor Square with Grosvenor themselves, the local and London communities, and the design team. So I just wanted to set out how all of the feedback that you've been giving us and we've been collecting has really influenced the design. So, when we joined the project back in March, there were these 11 principles that Grosvenor had for Grosvenor Square, and we invited feedback on those. And the feedback that we got on those shaped these 5 engagement themes that we used in May and June to really understand what people's priorities were. Those priorities were collected under the themes, and all of those priorities inspired Tonkin Loo's initial designs, which we showed in July and through to August, and then feedback on those have influenced the developing designs, and all of that helps us set forward the idea of kind of creating the shared vision of Grosvenor Square being a thriving place for people and planet. So if I can have the next slide, please. We've had a really amazing response. We've spoken to over 1,400 people. We've held over 23 events. We've had across all of our events, we've had over 2,000 people attending. We had our month-long exhibition in July, and we've had over 4,000 pieces of feedback, which I personally have read through, coded, analysed, and used to feed back into the design team what it is that people want to see for Grosvenor Square. So it's been an incredible response, and a huge thank you for everybody who's contributed and given their time, because we don't take it for granted at all. So the next slide, please. And I just want to make sure that we always bring it back to these community priorities that we shared for the first time in July. But these are a really important guiding principle for the project, and an important way of holding the project to account. So if I just go through the top couple from each of the themes, I think it's really helpful to have in our minds. So for green in our cities, we heard really loudly that people wanted Grosvenor Square to be a green oasis and not an event space. They wanted to keep trees for shelter and shade, and I'm going to add a third one in, which is the keeping a central open space is really important. For accessing outdoors, it was about stepping into nature, focusing on people, not cars, safe and secure environment, and walkways enclosed by nature. And I know tonight we'll probably dig into a little bit about how enclosed the right amount of enclosure is. Spectacular horticulture and biodiversity. I would sort of say people loved all of these, but it was about natural and wilder planting, variety and seasonal change, a variety of trees, inviting and supporting wildlife, but also the opportunity to delight our senses and be immersed in nature. Creating a healthy place was all about a calm and peaceful place. I think this is probably the thing, along with it not being an event space, that we've heard most about. Balancing that with providing playful experiences, smaller shelter and seating facilities, and smaller, more intimate spaces. And then urban ecology. So carefully utilising water, improving air quality, sustainable resources, and reducing noise pollution were the ones that people felt resonated with them most. So these are a really important guiding principle for us, as I said. So the next slide, please. So this evening, can we go? There we go. So the first chunk of information that we want to talk about is heritage. Now, one of our community priorities is to reflect the history of the square, and people really in the summer wanted to know how we intended to do that. I think in our summer exhibition, people responded really positively to the idea of reinstating the original oval geometry of the square, but they also wanted to know more about the heritage journey of the square and how that's going to be reflected in the designs, which is why we invited Cordula along this evening, because it's her area of expertise. And Cordula and Matt are now going to tell us a little bit more about this. Over to you two.
Hi, I don't know if you can see and hear me yet. Hello, hi, I'm Cordula from Donald Insel Associates, and I'm a heritage consultant. And I've looked at the history of Grosvenor Square throughout this project, and we thought it might be helpful just to talk a little bit more about what happened to the square over time. So next slide, please. I think many of you probably know the history of the square really well, but it's really interesting to look back at how it has changed over the centuries. So it was designed to be the centerpiece and at the heart of the Grosvenor estate in Mayfair when that was first built. So a grid of streets, and at the center, a landscaped, very large, very generous, landscaped, oval-shaped square. And that was really novel at the time, because up till then, open spaces in London tended to be hard surfaced, and they tended to be working surfaces rather than places of pleasure and enjoyment. And certainly the oval shape was completely revolutionary and really influential in terms of urban garden design. And then quite quickly in the 1770s, so just 50 years after the square was created, people who lived around the square felt they wanted it to be different. So the design got simplified and made a little wilder. So shrubberies replaced the really formal flower beds, and it really became more organic and really greener. In the 19th century, so you can see the map on the top right-hand side, much of the landscaping survived, but the square changed shape a little bit and became larger. It sort of became more lozenge-shaped, and it lost the sort of pure geometry of the oval that was so important for the Georgian design. But what really, really changed the square was the redesign after the war in 1947. So the square, which had been private, was made public, but it was also changed by an act of parliament to become a place of memory. So the statue of Franklin D. Roosevelt was put up on the north side, and the landscaping was completely remodeled so that everything was centered onto that statue. and that the landscaping really became secondary to the memorial function of the square. And next slide, please. And over time, the US-American layer of statues and memorials really got added to and increased. And I imagine many of you being locals know this very well, but the Grosvenor Square really now has a huge number of memorials that relate to US-American history. So we not only do we have Franklin D. Roosevelt, we have a memorial to the Eagle Squadron set on Axis. We have a memorial to remember 9/11. There are statues of Eisenhower and Reagan. They're obviously in storage at the moment, but they'll return. And there are buildings around the square which relate to US history as well. So the first American ambassador lived on the square. The US military headquarters were there. So this is a very important layer of history that exists sort of above the Georgian Garden Square, so to say, as a second layer of importance and significance. And the next slide, please. And what Tonkin Liu and the design team have been trying to achieve with the redesign is to build on both those layers. So the pioneering oval that was soft landscaped, and the importance of remembering the US-UK relationship through these memorials. So the design idea really is to strengthen the planting and the luscious green ambition that the Georgians have, and bring that back much more than it exists today, but also respect the US layer of history by retaining the sculptures and the relationships between them, removing some of the landscaping that surrounds FDR to make the square greener and more enjoyable as an amenity, but keeping all those sculptures and enhancing their setting. And I'm going to hand over to Matt and Anna now to talk more about the design.
So I think if we have our next slide.
Yes, I think this is Anna's going to be introducing the first part of the design presentation. So I'll ask Anna to unmute herself.
Hi. I'm going to begin by telling you a story. 300 years ago, an oval wilderness appeared in Mayfair. In time, the world has changed. The wilderness disappeared. Mayfair has changed. And the climate has changed. It was time to bring the oval wilderness back. 4 oval gardens arrive to transform Grosvenor Square. Corner garden, shaded garden, open garden, and hidden water garden. Each of the garden amplifies and builds on the best of what is already there. And each creates a different horticultural, social, and sensory experience. Each is an integral part to our response to climate challenges. A rainwater journey from the 4 corners of the garden, through the garden, to an underground cistern in the hidden water garden. I'll now pass you to Matt, my colleague, to go through the details of the 4 gardens.
Thank you, Anna. And the next slide, please. So in our storytelling methodology, we've been developing an emerging design that has responded to initially the Grosvenor's brief, but also the 5 themes and the community priorities that Catherine has described at the start of this talk. So the next slide, please. So our emerging design follows a series of 4 gardens and 4 garden visions for Grosvenor Square. Each one of these 4 spaces can provide a different type of function and a different type of garden space in the new garden square. The open gardens at the centre of Grosvenor Square provide an ambulatory path around the centre of the square that connects the post-war memorials. This green oasis is a sunny, open, flexible space that allows an expansive view of the sky in form of an open oval, buffered from the noise and pollutants of the city. In the centre, a wildflower meadow winds gently towards the west. You can rest on a series of oval plinths lining the edge of the meadow. The next slide, please. So within the open garden space, The existing memorials are retained, and then a view across between these memorials is protected in the new Grosvenor Square, where to the west, a rising gentle mind features a series of wildflower planting, which offer opportunities for different types of seating on the square. The next slide, please. The second garden space is the shaded gardens, which exist under the cool shaded canopies of the existing plane trees on the site. The next slide, please. We will create an intensively biodiverse garden with integral paths, mounds, swales, rain gardens, and play, as well as resting areas for people. Social oval rooms offer an opportunity for people to enjoy garden activities while being surrounded by nature. The next slide, please. The hidden water garden at the centre of Grosvenor Square is a space to be discovered. Hidden beneath the rising mound to the west of the open garden, a stepped terrace leads you to an underground space. Next slide, please. This green amphitheatre is for watching the spectacles of nature and the comings and goings of people. Raindrops are seen, touched and heard landing into the central cistern pool. As the day unfolds, shafts of sunlight illuminate different areas of the primeval planting and the delicate rainwater ripples. The underground cistern captures, circulates and cleanses water to be harvested as a precious resource for the city and used for keeping all four gardens of Grosvenor Square green. Next slide, please. Outside the historical boundary of Grosvenor Square, the corner gardens create a new threshold for people to step into nature, welcoming people to the square from the four corners of the gardens. We will bring back the oval boundary. The next slide, please. Reclaim the roads from cars and provide shelter and amenities, extending nature out into the city. So these corner gardens provide a new welcoming space to the square and provide a new sense of arrival into Grosvenor Square Gardens, which is one of the key themes of the currently running engagement. So the next slide, please. So one of the recurring themes and responses we've been getting to the emerging community priorities and themes has been how we create a new type of arrival space at the square and how the arrival sequence can be improved from what it is today. Next slide, please. So the corner gardens are the first space to be visited at a new visit to Grosvenor Square. And these spaces look outwards to the surrounding street and provide a new type of space to arrive in the gardens. In the air, floating rain baskets act as beacons and gateways to define the entrances to the garden spaces. People gather underneath the shade of the trees and the shade of these rain baskets to meet one another before a walk around the gardens. The next slide, please. Timber columns that hold the canopies in the air provide lighting and smart devices to make the surrounding streets safe, healthy and active. As the rain falls, the water is channeled and collected in the rain basket and is funneled to a series of basins where the water falls from above into a series of pools that invite people to see, hear and touch water. The next slide, please. Underneath these floating rain baskets, a series of small lightweight timber structures provide a series of garden amenities. These include takeaway refreshments, public toilets, a gardener's office and an education space for people to learn about the square, its horticulture and its ecology. Next slide, please. Upon entering the square and passing up through the oval boundary, you are immersed in nature, leaving the corner garden spaces and arriving in the shaded gardens within the boundary of the garden square itself. A mixture of direct and meandering routes offer journeys for people, both that want to move quickly through the square and for those that want to move slowly on a meandering route through the planting. Views across the square are focused towards the spacious open garden in the centre. A variety of tall and shorter planting is used to balance sight lines within the shaded garden for safety, with a balance of feeling immersed in nature. The next slide, please. Another recurring theme and piece of feedback we've been receiving through the engagement events has been the desire for new types of play to be offered in Grosvenor Square. So we've recently brought in a new play consultant to the design team that we're working with called Davis White, and our emerging designs will do more to integrate play within the scheme. The next slide, please. We will be seeking opportunities for play to be integrated into the garden landscape, and particularly within the shaded garden spaces. Natural play structures will promote exploring, climbing and sliding, while ecological play structures will promote an engagement of the senses. And we're holding a series of play workshops in the square as a part of this month's engagement programme. The next ones are happening on the 15th and 27th of October. The next slide, please. The journey of water is a very important part of the new emerging designs for Grosvenor Square, and this starts at the corner garden spaces I've described, where we collect the water from the sky. And it culminates in the hidden water garden space in the centre of the gardens. The next slide, please. So to create a new Grosvenor Square that is a resilient square to put up a fight against the climate change challenge, where we will be harvesting natural water as a precious natural resource to feed the garden spaces. Water is channeled from the surrounding streets and through the gardens to reduce the pressure on the surrounding drainage network. Water is then collected in the hidden water gardens, and it's cleansed by the sun in a small constructed wetland area above ground. Next slide, please. The gentle rising mound to the west of the open gardens opens to allow people and water to channel into this below ground space of wonder. Water makes rippling sounds as it passes and falls across varied surfaces. The next slide, please. In the centre of the hidden water gardens is a collection pool. As it rains above ground, water percolates through the soil and drips from above through the roof to make it rain in this below ground space. Shafts of light illuminate the surrounding plants and the falling water as people gather for respite in the city in this hidden water garden space. Thank you. And on the next slide, I'll be passing to Nigel, who will talk in more detail about our planting proposals.
Okay, so just before Nigel speaks, I'm just going to give a little introduction to the planting piece. You know, I think one of the things in all of our conversations with both local and London communities have been around wanting the Grosvenor Square to be a place with planting that delights the senses, that's very clearly a green oasis, not an event space, that it should invite wildlife and more natural and wilder planting, and that it needs to balance kind of calm and playful with a focus on well-being, where people feel as though they can step into a place that's enclosed by nature in a safe and secure environment, but has a kind of a fabulous central open space. And in terms of planting and biodiversity, I think there was something about the magic and delight of planting that you wanted to hear more about. I know that Nigel can deliver that in buckets, but the potential to provide wilder, more natural planting, seasonal variety, delight the senses, invite and support wildlife were all in the community priorities, and people wanted to know a bit more about how these would be achieved. You know, there's something interesting about how the vision allowing for 4 different types of gardens allows for 4 different types of planting within the square. So I'm going to hand over to Nigel now to tell us more about that planting, the different gardens, the trees within Grosvenor Square, and he might touch a little bit upon the planted oval that he's helped to design as part of the exhibition that we've got live at the moment. Thank you, Nigel.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. You've saved me some of my introduction there. So look, I think we all agree, and certainly a lot of the feedback and the consultation of people I've spoken to in the square, that, you know, we can do amazing things. We can do extraordinary things with planting in the square, using horticulture and ecology to really bring this vision alive that Catherine's just talked about. I think it's all about diversification. We all know that diversity is the key to ecological function. Whether it's water management, whether it's cleaning air, whether it's reducing noise, it's really the key to greater biodiversity, which is a huge objective to maximize wildlife value. And diversity is really central to human delight. So we can achieve a huge amount with the planting. It's not really just about diversifying the number of different plants. It's more about diversifying the types and character of the planting. And we've already seen a glimpse of that possibility, how we can put so many more layers of character into the square. Next slide, please. So building upon the things that we've already heard about, all of the different experiences and areas in the square can be enhanced, can be created, can be magnified through the planting experience. If we go to the next slide, I guess one of the most important aspects is consideration of the trees. And of course, the glory of the square are the existing mature trees and the character and the shade and the atmosphere that they give. And we wouldn't want to do anything to change that in any way, shape or form. But we do have the opportunity to diversify the tree layer, particularly in the light of which trees are perhaps unhealthy or not doing their very best. But I think more importantly, in terms of the future and climate change and resilience and increasing both human value and particularly wildlife value. There's a real opportunity to introduce a new layer of tree planting, small and medium-sized trees that can give wonderful spring and summer flowers, lots of fruit, both for people and for wildlife, as well as wonderful autumn color. So, for example, we're looking at trees such as flowering dogwoods, cornus, crabapples, cherries, hawthorns, magnolias, mountain ashes, all of these trees which can give us so much. The planted oval, which many of you would have seen, gives a little hint, I suppose, of what that medium and small size tree layer can bring. In fact, within that planted oval, we have a lot of edible trees and fruiting trees. There's medlars, citrus trees, crab apples, there's a cinnamon tree, a pistachio tree as well. Huge amount of interest in growing edible plants, and we can make a sort of mini forest garden with the way that we might think about introducing new layers of planting trees and shrubs in places. Next slide, please. We do need a sustainable tree strategy because we are looking to the future, of course, when we think about reimagining the square. It's a great chance. It's a once in a lifetime, a once in a generation chance to really look at every tree and say, is it really doing its job? And I think, of course, the vast majority of them are. And there was an independent tree survey done at the start of this process, and most of the trees are identified as being in perfect health and have a great future. A small number were identified as having a very short life, or as being diseased or very misshapen. And we propose to take these away. This plan shows the ones in red, very small number, which allows us to bring new trees in to increase that diversity. In fact, we are looking to maybe remove maybe 10 to 20 trees of the existing trees, all of them small, but we will be looking to put in many, many more new trees. So there will be a significant net gain in the number of trees. And I think it's also a chance to think about climate change in the future and even thinking about what the long-term strategy will be for the big canopy trees. Next slide, please. Just to elaborate a little bit on the character of the plantings that that's already been touched upon. Next slide, please. The four gardens allow us to really explore very different characters of planting, but all within the same idea of more natural planting, of wilder planting, of more ecological planting. The corner gardens, has already been said, give us the chance to really push the square outwards, to turn grey to green and to increase natural capital and ecological function. We'd like these to be a little bit more formal than maybe the main plantings in the square. They're very outward facing, lower growing, a little bit better behaved perhaps than some of the other plantings in the park, and for them to look really good every day of the year. Moving on, please, next slide. And then moving into the square, the shaded gardens is really where the journey begins, and it gives us the greatest opportunity for really doing wonderful things with planting. I suppose it's good to think here maybe of the experience that many of us have had of being in the most wonderful bluebell wood with sheets of wildflowers stretching out in front of us and big mature trees scattered around. What a wonderful vision to try and capture. But is it possible to capture that, but for it not to be just there for a week or two in the spring, but for it to be there all of spring and all of summer and all of autumn and into the winter, so that we have this same sort of experience really throughout the year. Next slide, please. The open gardens allow us to have a completely different type of planting. Of course, the main function here is to have plenty of open space, but because these are more sunny and more open, we can have a more meadowy planting. And I think this gives us a great possibility in terms of biodiversity to create great pollinator support and enhancement of the wildlife interest, particularly for invertebrates. Wildflower meadows, flowering lawns, and more structured, more contemporary perennial plantings give us the chance for not only sparkling colour right the way through the summer, but wonderful seed heads and winter structure too. Next slide, please. And then the hidden water garden, as you've seen from the images, gives us a chance for a wonderful culmination of the journey through the square. A real contrast to what might happen above ground, a primeval, exotic, tropical experience with bold foliage, bright flowers, interesting and intoxicating scent. Next slide, please. Finally, I just really want to emphasize that one of the key considerations in thinking about the planting and horticulture is seasonal change and year-round interest, really ensuring that the winter is as vibrant and as full of interest as the summer. I was in the square yesterday, and of course the autumn colors are starting to come along, and what a great opportunity there is for virtually every day to be different, for there always to be something different to see, and for the winter experience to be as exciting as the summer experience. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Nigel. So we are going to bring everybody together now, all our panelists together for a Q&A panel discussion. I'm going to keep my microphone on, but my kids are screaming downstairs, so apologies if you can hear that in the background. We have got some questions already, which I'm going to put to the panel, but if people have questions, please do put them in the chat channel and I will ask as many as I possibly can. So if the panel can all join me, we stop screen sharing, and Ed is also going to join us. Amazing, thank you. So we are all here. Okay, thank you everybody for that, for all those presentations. We're going to have about 45 minutes, I think, for questions, so please do send them in. I'm going to start with one for Cordia, but I think other people might want to chip in, which is about, I guess, how the heritage context is really being respected. So there's something, I think always curious about shapes that can feel really contemporary and how they sit within a context that has all this fantastic heritage, and how you I guess reconcile those two things without feeling like actually some of that heritage is being not removed or erased.
Yes, thanks, Catherine. I think that's a really fascinating question. And to be honest, it's not easily resolved, because we have two completely different layers of heritage, which are both fascinating and interesting. So the Georgian Square, which was all about planting and amenity for people who lived around the square, was one thing. And then in the late 1940s, we had the memorial landscape, which pretty much survives today. And both of those are fascinating and are a very important part of our heritage. So I think the team has been really, really aware that we didn't want to erase any of those layers. But what has been really important is to recognize that Mayfair is a place where people live and visit and work, and where having some amenity, as the Georgians originally envisaged, is actually really important. And to strengthen that, we felt was really, really key, and that would build on heritage. And equally, the US layer of history is important. It's interesting because things are changing. The US embassy has now moved away, so there'll be a hotel instead of having the embassy, and things are changing around the square a little bit. So it feels less institutional now, and will feel even more like a place where people live. but we want to very much hang on to the memorials and sculptures so that people can remember what Grosvenor Square used to stand for in the mid-20th century. So it's an interesting, I'd say, balancing act, trying to build on both and creating something third, which brings those two things together.
I think it is that balance of the actually what you're talking about as a heritage context. It's about planting, but that can feel like it's somehow a loss of some of the formality of what's there at the moment. I don't know whether Anna, Matt, turn your mics on if you want to say something or add anything to that. Nigel, everyone always has questions for Nigel. So just thinking about how you balance these priorities around immersive planting or being enclosed with planting and this sense of safety. I think it's, obviously we've got the fabulous planted oval in the square at the moment, but I think, there are some questions about, is it too dense? Like actually when I'm inside, I feel really enclosed. So I wonder if you could say something or answer that little bit around how you balance that safety and sense of immersion.
Sure. I would say to begin with that the planted oval is not intended to be a replica of what will happen in the square in terms of a small scale version of what will happen in the square in one of the social spaces. Because the temporary garden was created in open lawn, we needed to create a sense of enclosure so that when you went into it, you felt you were in a garden rather than being in the middle of an open lawn. So that's why it takes the form of a little glade. But in reality, of course, there is a big issue about having too constricted a space in an urban square. And we wouldn't want to bring the planting so close to the paths that you felt you were constricted in. It's important that we maintain sight lines through, that people feel safe. We have the space to set any structure planting and shrubs and trees back, or we use multi-stems or see-through trees and shrubs so that you have, say, foliage at head height, but you can see through the stems underneath. So if anybody is a little bit concerned that the planted oval is trying to give an impression of the density of planting and the kind of sense of enclosure, then it's really purely because of the need to create a small scale garden for the exhibition. It's not intended to indicate exactly how dense the planting will be and how close to paths and how kind of claustrophobic it will feel in the end. Almost the opposite is the case.
Thank you, Nigel. Actually, I'm going to say from an engagement perspective, it's been really useful because it's prompted all of those conversations. And it's, actually when people talked about being enclosed by nature and something being immersive, I think maybe we all draw something different or think something different about that. So it's been a really, really useful talking point about how dense that planting would be. So while we're on the ovals, Matt, Anna, it would be kind of useful for you to talk a little bit more about how they might be used. I think some of the questions around, well, what do you do in these ovals? What are they for?
Ooh. Should I take that, Matt?
Sure, you take that one, yeah.
We like them to be as multi-functional as possible. So, for instance, if you have a big group of people, you can go into one of the larger ones, say, for instance, a classroom of people. Or if you want to be alone, you go into a smaller one and you just want to read. And in a way, we haven't fixed the activities in each of them because it's another thing that we need to balance the kind of social space and the social activities between that and the horticultural delight. But the intention is that because the paths are twisting and turning as Matt's described, that you're constantly visually linked to the different spaces around you through the planting. So, I'm sure Nigel will be sort of sculpting the space with his planting.
Amazing, thank you. So I'm going to flip to different topics. So I'm going to, Ed, ask you, because I think this is also one of the top questions that we get asked, is around maintenance. I think when people see something that looks so fabulous, with such an array of different types of planting. It immediately, like, it's different to what we see in public spaces at the moment, and it triggers all these things around, well, how's that going to be maintained, and what does this mean, in the way that we're not fearful of a lawn because we understand lawnmowers. So Ed, and I'm sure Nigel, you might have something to say on this as well, just like how is the process thought about maintenance, and what does maintenance mean in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Nigel's probably a better place to talk about some of the practicalities of it. But I mean, the principle is that, yeah, I mean, we totally get it. You can't create a space and not commit to managing and maintaining it to the highest standards. And Grosvenor Square is so important for Mayfair and for the West End that it needs to be looked after. And we are committed to making sure that maintenance management plans are put in place to ensure that happens. And I mean, we haven't really got into the detail of that yet. We've been iterating the design, speaking to people, trying to understand what it is that actually we should try and create. And the next stage, and as we now kind of start building up to a planning application and understanding what is what is needed to turn this into a reality, the maintenance and management plan and really getting under the skin of how that's going to work is a key work stream for us over the next few months. But as Nigel will hopefully tell us, it doesn't necessarily need to be such an uplift in management as it might look at first.
Yeah, I agree, and I would just confirm what Ed has said. As a slightly more independent person, I think the commitment to the best quality maintenance from Grosvenor is absolutely for definite. I mean, totally secure in that. But as Ed says, that complexity and diversity do not need to mean high maintenance. The whole approach I take really is a low input, a sustainable approach to create these sorts of effects. I think it's worth saying, though, that we're all familiar, I think, with the low quality maintenance in a lot of our urban parks now, and the shall we say, the lowering of the profile of gardeners and gardening. And I think it's really important that we say that the craft of gardening and maintaining the space is really, really important, and those skills are something that we treasure. So I think we will have dedicated staff, we'll have really well-trained staff who will be ambassadors for the square, and hopefully will have some influence on raising the profile of high quality maintenance. And we all have the ambition, as Ed said, for this to be the best green space in London, and maintenance has to go alongside that, but it can be a different kind of maintenance. And I would just finally say, without wanting to hog it, that an important part of our discussions are that this can be a hotbed for training, for new ideas, for training new generations of gardeners in new skills to maybe look after other places in the same sort of way.
Well, I think there's been some interesting research that I was looking at today around, the loss of biodiversity and the impact that is having on, climate change. And it's such an important moment to really think about increasing biodiversity. And that does mean we're hopefully going to start seeing a different type of planting than perhaps we all might be more familiar with, and therefore it evokes less of a reaction to us. So Matt, I'm going to come to you about open space, such the key thing. We have this priority around keeping an open space, and therefore the size of this central oval garden, or the open garden, becomes quite contentious, or whether or not it's big enough, and therefore how that balances with the shaded garden. So I guess there's a couple of questions there. One, like, why does the shaded garden have to be as big as it is in order to, and therefore feeling like it's encroaching on the size of the open garden that there might be at the moment? So is there still room for push and pull between those two boundaries?
So that was one of the sort of big pieces of feedback from our engagement earlier in the summer, and following that we sort of went into the design in a bit more detail, and we really tried to maximize the size of that open garden space in the middle. It's currently around 110 meters long and 60 meters wide, so about the equivalent of a full-size football pitch. So really the whole premise behind the layout of the balance between the shaded garden and the open garden is making that central open space as big as it can be, because actually, once you go outside that central oval within the realms of the existing gardens, you're underneath the shade of all of the plane trees that exist on the square. So it's already almost defined by the existing characteristics of the gardens. I think the other element to highlight is the changing of the perimeter of the garden space itself. Currently, not much happens between the current path that meanders around the outside of Grosvenor Square and the existing hedgerow. There's a gap of sometimes several meters in depth between that meandering route, which is lined with benches, and the holly hedge, which is a really underutilized piece of space. Whereas what the proposals in the shaded garden do is they take those meandering routes and bring them much closer to the garden edges to make that shaded garden space much more useful as well.
I mean, I think there's going to be something interesting about how this plays out in terms of the density of planting that exists in the shaded garden in response to the comment that Nigel was making around the planted oval, the temporary planted oval that we've got at the moment, and therefore how much you really have that sense of being always somewhere else. So whether it really feels like you're cutting away, because I guess you can be under the trees at the moment and still feel like you are in the open space, and it's whether that characteristic is retained.
Yes, yeah, that's true, and I think the current layout for the gardens also include some of the existing trees that are in the square. So one of the mature plane trees and the Japanese tree of heaven and the Hungarian oak that exists to the eastern side of the middle of the square are within the open garden space itself. So that inner oval that we're proposing as part of the emerging design does have a couple of tree species within it already towards that side of the gardens. And I think really it's about finding a balance, because otherwise, if we bring the open oval, if you bring the even inner oval further outwards, we would have to relocate some of the existing structures and memorials, and it may get too close to the 9/11 memorial. And we've always been very aware of the sensitivity that you want that setting to have in the east, and how we want the memorial garden, the 9/11 structure, to remain a sort of place of respite. So we don't want to bring all these activities that may happen on that inner oval space and bring them to the east and sort of impede on that space to that side.
And I guess while we're on open space, Ed, I'm going to ask you and put you on the spot about helicopters, because we've got a few questions in the chat, and I know that people have mentioned this in the past, that there's an emergency helicopter that lands in the square. And I guess if you're saying that the open space is broadly speaking actually the same, because the existing trees actually create a boundary of sorts to that open space. But anyway, Ed, I'm going to let you answer the helicopter question.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, it sounds like the helicopters landed a few times recently in Grosvenor Square, which is never good news. But no, I mean, absolutely. I guess if this is a core site that the air ambulance needs to use, it needs to be part of the design requirements, and we need to make sure that is retained. But yeah, as Catherine says, we're not planting any additional trees within that central space, meaning that there shouldn't be any reason that it is impeded. But yeah, absolutely, it's something that we as a project team need to make sure that is included within design, and will be if that's what the air ambulance needs.
Okay, great. So Cordula, there is often a conversation, I'm going to unleash the fence conversation or the boundary conversation, but how you deal sensitively with a boundary. Again, I think, boundaries to squares and to public squares are things that we have quite a defined sense of what that boundary should be. And I'm just wondered if you could say something about that from a heritage perspective.
Yes, yeah, really interesting. Looking at other squares in London and how they are defined and what their boundaries are. So what we've got in Grosvenor Square is a chain link fence, which is embedded in a holly hedge that was planted in 1947. So that was something that was done to be functional and to provide a sort of a secure, proper boundary to the square. It's not the most beautiful thing, and it's certainly not what you would normally expect in a London square, where you have normally really handsome railings. In many places, they disappeared during the war, were melted for the war effort, but in some squares, they've been put back, in others, they've survived. And I think thinking about having railings enclosing a square is really important as a sort of London typology, because they allow you to see through, they give you an element of architecture, which sits normally nicely with the planting around it. So I think this is a really important design consideration. How can the enclosure that exists today and that is a bit utilitarian, how can it be improved so that it reads better with the square? It allows you to look through, and it's an element that enhances what's beautiful and architecturally important about the square.
Yes, I'm sure as we progress, there will be many more conversations about boundaries or fencing or what goes at the edge. So Anna, I'm not sure whether this is a question for now or it might be a question for later on, but I think there's a few questions. I guess the hidden water garden kind of evokes all of these questions about how is this possible? How does it work? How do you put a roof on it? Is there light? So I'm going to encapsulate that in a little bit of a, if you could just talk about the roof and whether you can walk on it. Is it planted? If there's light that then goes through it into the space below?
Yeah, so the meadow, the wildflower meadow above is intended to sort of gently mound up. Very early on, we were quite inspired by this phrase that described Grosvenor Square, upon a rising mound with fields all around. So, and you know, in a way, people also quite like a bit of a mound, and you know, they're sort of attracted to gathering on this slightly elevated space without taking away much of the flexibility of that space. You can still have this open space and come up to this kind of slightly higher point, which allows you to then tuck in an entrance that sort of seamlessly flows into a green amphitheater. And the idea of this space is that if you were seeking to take shelter on a rainy day or seeking to sort of have a quieter space, you go underneath. It would be always cool and in the summer, and it will also maintain a kind of stable temperature. So really ideal for kind of spectacular primeval garden that Nigel described. So it's almost as if we're asking Grosvenor Square to work just that bit harder to create yet another garden that is kind of an unusual garden to be discovered. So I think we all have been to crypts or grottos, before, where there's this sense of excitement and discovery. So that's one thing. And the other thing is about the water. If we could capture and store and cleanse the excessive rainwater we're now getting from flash storms and use it when we really need it during long periods of drought, then we could potentially use this water to keep all the gardens green, which would make a lot of sense. And that space, without impeding a lot on the space above, could be such a space. So it's infrastructure, garden, and a kind of civic space. Does that make sense? And so the other side of, as Matt described, is there are skylights that, so you go down there, it's almost like a kind of sundial. You see light come through the different skylights at different parts of day. So I think people will really enjoy it as a new kind of space underneath the square.
And I'm going to ask a geeky, techie question that I think people have been asking about it, which is, does it get locked at night? What happens? I think there's somehow, in the same way that people ask questions about the planting, that we have this desire for spectacular things, but also we're fearful that they're going to not be safe, which is legitimate. So does it get locked at night? Has it kept safe? I'm not sure whether Ed, you're also going to want to come in on this.
It's interesting. We've talked about, even for the boundary, we talked about the evolution of trust. Does a square get locked at night? Some squares don't get locked till very late at night, and the fact that those squares are safe. So there's an argument for something that's very, very visually connected to the rest of the square and therefore safe. Or there's also an argument for closing it at night and keeping it secure. Certainly the square would be locked at night, so that probably does already enhance the safety of this space. So Ed, do you want to jump in on the sort of the practical aspects of this space?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, I guess what we're talking more about is safety and about antisocial behaviour, isn't it? And about how you make sure that you're not designing a problem in the future. And yeah, and I think that something like the hidden garden, we absolutely probably need to look at whether it has a a shutter that means that it's shut off at night, so that and we all know that people jump over the fence into Grosvenor Square currently, and there's no reason why that's going to change unless the fences suddenly become 10 foot tall. And so something that's going to be underground, warmer in the winter, as we discussed, has the potential to be an attractor of antisocial behaviour, and therefore we would perhaps need to look at how we prevent that happening, and it may need to be shuttered off. And we're working with some great security consultants on different options about how we might look at that. But more broadly across the garden, I think that it was the same logic applies in all of the 4 gardens. And it was great to kind of hear Nigel talk about the planted oval that's in the square at the moment, because I mean, certainly when I saw it, I was like, whoa, that's big. That's a lot of planting. That's high. That is, that is going to cause people concerns, because it, like, understandably, you can be hidden in there. But, but it's been designed for that specific, role that it has, sitting in the middle of the square. It's not a cut and paste example. And actually, if you look at some of the CGIs, I think the seasonal variety one that Nigel showed earlier, which shows the kind of the summer and winter, I think that you can have that rich planting, but it can be low, and there can be pockets where it's higher, probably of course at the outside, so we get that very nice barrier from the traffic that exists around Grosvenor Square. So controlling the heights of the planting and those kind of things mean that we're not creating dark and dangerous kind of pockets and alcoves within the garden. And I guess it's one of the great things of running a community consultation process as early and as detailed as we have been, which is that we're able to really hear what people are concerned about and make sure that we're able to design accordingly. Like we're here to listen, and we hear what people's concerns are, and we're obviously not going to go and design something that means that we're not allaying those concerns.
Yeah, I think well, first of all, thanks, Ed. That is the reason for it's our mission as a business, is about kind of getting people involved early enough. And I think that's why I'm quite I'm even the comments that are coming through, I can see some quite some negative comments or some challenging comments in the chat, and I think that's what this is about. It's about us hearing that and us understanding kind of that sense of safety. Whether or what the challenges are on safety in particular. I think definitely the conversations that were prompted by the planted oval have been incredibly useful and allowed us to talk more about kind of sight lines. So actually, when I enter the square, do I want moments when I can see all the way across, and then I feel that sense of safety? And when I say enclosed, I don't mean literally like I'm hiding in a hedge. So I think it's understanding that balance, and I think very early on when we had our accessing the outdoors conversation, there were comments about wanting to be able to make sure that the square remained locked at night. But then, as you say, Ed, like people can still climb over. So then whether the hidden water garden is also locked is something that we've got to really explore and balance those things. But it's, I'm going to say from an engagement perspective, it's great to hear like what the things are that are particularly challenging or pushing buttons for people that makes them think these things need to be resolved. Equally, I think I can see some stuff around the size of the open garden that might be alleviated with some drawings that would show that actually it isn't about a really, really thick layer of planting around the edge. That means that you're either in the open garden or out of the open garden, that potentially it's a bit more blurry. There's all of those things to explore. So I'm going to go for something playful. Anna, Matt, you can choose who answers this, which is around, I think play. It was interesting in the summer that people were really clear that play is something that we hadn't addressed adequately in the designs, and then we've brought Davies White on board to run their workshops and really work with families about what that is. But there's quite often this conversation about, well, where is play? Is play in one place, or is play kind of dotted around? So it'd be useful to hear what your current thinking is around that.
I think it's still part of the sort of emerging process. I wouldn't say we haven't by any means decided that it should be one or the other. I think it would be it would be a shame if all of the play was sort of located in one area of the gardens, because you're maybe missing an opportunity for different types of play to be woven around the different types of garden spaces we're talking about. I think the shaded garden space, the nature of it sort of enveloping the whole gardens and having this meandering route lends itself maybe to having sort of nodal points along that journey that can foster quite direct sort of play interventions that can be relatively small in scale, but sort of frequently positioned around the gardens. And maybe in one corner of the gardens, they're more concentrated and there's a greater degree of these play structures together, because the flip side of the conversation is always having one area which is slightly separate allows other areas of the gardens to be freed up, maybe from more noise, and it also helps with sort of keeping an eye on children and that sort of thing. So there's always positives and negatives to either way, but we definitely feel that, you know, we hear that play is a really big priority for a lot of people with this project. So we want to find ways that we can creatively weave it through the different garden spaces.
You know, Natalie and I were talking, so people who haven't met Natalie, Natalie's another member of Make Good, we're talking about the fact that we'd heard a lot of feedback around like wanting a concentration, whether or not there are other pieces that are kind of dotted around, but if there's like some kind of concentration of play, and balancing that sense of playfulness and creating a calm space. So this is also a question to the audience, like, please do, you know, if you have thoughts and ideas about play, please do let us know, because it's something that we definitely are in the process of exploring a bit more.
I think maybe just to add another point to that, Catherine, but I mean, we have been sort of, a few of our recent conversations have been about how we can do that. We can have more sort of more defined and a greater degree of a sort of play cluster maybe within the shaded gardens. So maybe some of those oval rooms and social rooms that I've talked about could be slightly connected to each other. So maybe 2 or 3 of them become more overtly play spaces than maybe just relying on this overall meandering route.
Yeah, lots to be.
That is a possibility, and it probably goes back to the balance between having program spaces versus flexible spaces. And if play really truly comes from nature and comes from the seasonal change and the activation, you know, by wind or sun or rain, I think that would be the most exciting with this garden. I think once you put too many structures in the shaded garden, people will start to miss that openness.
Yeah, I think there's definitely more work or more balance to be created, isn't there, between this desire that people are talking about and kind of retaining that openness, and how we show that that has been embedded and included in the design. Okay, so I'm going to ask, I'm reading the chat at the same time, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists to kind of bring it back to the community priorities just for a minute, and to see, you know, just to tell us a little bit about which of them they think really resonates most with the designs. You can pick more than one if you want to, with the designs that are presented. So Nigel, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you. Well, I think in terms of the horticulture and planting, the community priorities, which were sort of there at the start, arising out of this process, seem to be just so inspiring to me. Just the phrase of stepping into nature, I think, from the surrounding urbanness, I think is such an evocative one, and I think it's really what we've tried to do. The natural and wild planting, again, was a very big element coming out of that, which again is something that we've really looked to try and capture. And the planting to be immersed in, again, is something that we really have worked with. So I think the top 3 items on the horticulture and biodiversity list have really informed the way that we've thought about it.
I've almost trained Nigel to like the word spectacular. Almost. Cortula, what about you?
I think we had under the umbrella of greening, we had a community priority of respecting heritage. And I think that is so interesting, because we are building on two things which are historic, but we're also, I think, building on the fact that Grosvenor Square has changed dramatically twice at least over time. So this is not a static space. Some places in London haven't changed that much, and it's really important to people that they preserve exactly their appearance and their character. I think with Grosvenor Square, that's been through waves of political and other changes that have really reconfigured how it looks and how it feels. And I think that's really useful to understand. So to give us, in essence, to give us a bit of liberty to change it again, but not in such a way that we get rid of what's come before. And I think that can be a positive thing for us to take ownership again and to say, yes, we're interested in the US history and we'll hang on to it and we want to remember things. And we are very interested in how things were in Georgian times, but we also need to make a place for people now that works in the 21st century. And I think that's very much in the spirit of the people who created the square in the first place, because they wanted to have the best possible outdoor space for people who lived in Mayfair. And I think that's really the design brief again. So I think heritage is really interesting and it's not static and it can allow us to build on it. So that's what I find most exciting about this project.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, with heritage, because we sometimes find one moment or one point into something and think that that's the only story of it, and actually it's much more complex than that. Matt.
Yeah, I think the first theme of green in our city sort of really brought home this feeling of making a sort of green open space. And I think, you know, we've got to make sure that Grosvenor Square becomes almost a space of all things for all people, because it's a public space in the centre of London and it's a space at the centre of one of the great London estates. It's a place for residents and for businesses and for visitors to enjoy. And in a way, the emerging brief has this requirement, but it has a lot of contradictions about how we bring in this feeling of intimacy and this feeling of immersion in nature, but balancing it with openness, while also layering on the aspects of biodiversity and with urban ecology, the feeling that we need to make a space that really values the natural resources. So I think a combination of how we create a resilient square that is become successful for the next 100 years with the climate change agenda, but also, you know, even more relevant this year, how important our green spaces are for the new world that we live in after sort of COVID-19, and how we all actually have to find more spaces that we can share as a community. So those spaces have to work harder to offer more diverse uses.
Thank you, but you love contradictions, Matt.
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Kath.
Anna.
You're on mute, Anna.
Sorry, reconciling contradictions is the best challenge of design, good design. Yeah, so my favorite is probably this idea that people do see rainwater as a precious resource and then seeing it as a source of joy, to see, touch, and hear rainwater. So those two things combined is quite a compelling part of the community priorities, and thinking about how we take that sort of attitude forward to leave a legacy now here in 2020 for future generations, so that we do demonstrate in the back of our minds the worries we have with the climate challenges, and we do demonstrate how we might innovatively respond to those challenges for our future.
Thank you. So Ed, I'm going to give you a question and then I'm going to let you answer the other one, because actually I managed to drum up a few more questions, I think, in my asking you my slightly closing question. So within the corner gardens at the moment, there's this idea of potentially having structures and the uses of those structures. And I think, you know, as is slightly always the case, I think, with conversations about kiosks or toilets or any kind of function, I think, you know, it's controversial. So is it needed? Does the square need these things? And if it does, why?
So each of the uses that we are proposing have been proposed for a very specific reason. It isn't just to kind of fill space. I mean, we know that some of them are polarizing. People have strong views on either side of to include or not include for certainly for the kiosk and for the public toilets. We know that kiosk and the ability to get refreshments means that people are able to stay and enjoy the space longer, that it will increase dwell time, and that is the rationale for proposing that's there. We don't want it to be a cafe, we don't want it to have a cafe environment around it, we don't want there to be tables and chairs. It's a hole in the wall to enable you to get a bottle of water, whatever it may be, and we feel that that's an important thing to enable people to use the square for longer. Public toilets, there are currently there's one public toilet in the whole of Mayfair, and we don't think that's very helpful for an area the size of Mayfair with the number of visitors that it has. I think it's a bit like we were talking about management earlier. Grosvenor have a significant interest in the success of this area, and the last thing that we would want to see is the creation of something that is, damaging to the environment that is Mayfair. This is not going to be some grotty public toilet. That's obviously not something that we would advocate the creation of. I don't know, there are examples of public toilets in London and around the world where they are designed and managed to a high standard that any of us would be more than happy to take a visit there. And I think that with this idea of this use, this is not about low grade convenience. This is about making sure that we have a high grade amenity for our communities. So those are, say, the two kind of more polarizing proposals. The other two is a gardener's office, which I think most people tend to acknowledge is going to be really important given the amount of management that's going to be required for the square. But also there's an opportunity for this person, for our head gardener, to have a really public facing role and to be really engaging with people who visit the square and help that kind of interpretation of what Anna and Matt and Nigel and the rest of the team are hoping to create. And then kind of building upon that, we've been talking to some really fascinating teams about how we can use this kind of interpretation and actually build upon it to a point of education where school groups and or even professionals could come to Grosvenor Square and learn about what has been done and how it's been done and how hopefully it's been a huge success from an ecological perspective and horticultural perspective. One of the early things that we've learned from that process is that to bring school groups, you have to have an indoor space that can seat 30 kids or they won't come. They won't book to come on a rainy day. And we feel like that's a huge missed opportunity. So we'd like to include a small classroom so that they can come. And obviously our hope is that they'd be outside and not in the classroom, but sadly it does rain. Although not sadly, because Anna and Matt, I'm sure, would love there to be rain flowing through the rain baskets as much as possible. So yeah, but I guess there's a lot of conversation to be had about these and about
there
this.
It's definitely an interesting one. Kind of in reading all the feedback, it's so polarized. There is equal amounts of people saying it's a really good thing and equal amounts of people saying it's a bad thing. But I think this rationale of placing them within the corner gardens so they're not smack bang in the middle of the square, I guess helps to balance that a little bit. Ed, what's your priority that resonates?
It's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, I've just been flicking through them, and I don't know. There's a piece about, I don't know. I guess I feel like we're so lucky to have this list of priorities because they're so clear. It's such a clear set of instructions and set of principles and things to be held account for us to be held account with. But yeah, there are such, I don't know, the things that always resonate for me, I think, are about this kind of stepping into nature. And Nigel was sort of saying a lot of the stuff that I think really resonates for me personally. And the ability to sort of create a new garden experience and to help you know, us in the middle of the city get closer to some amazing ecology and horticulture and planting. But yeah, as I was going through that, you know, there are amazing contradictions that exist between the priorities, and you know, I think right next to each other on our list we have safe and secure environment, and then we have walkways enclosed by nature. And you know, words like enclosed don't shout safe and secure. So actually, you know, that is you know, we're lucky that we've got a team who love contradictions, because that is all of our challenge, and you know, we're kind of making our way through it together, so, and with all of your help, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's been, you know, there are inevitably contradictions, but there is also different interpretations of the same word, and that happens once you take something from a word into into a proposal. That, you know, these things always happen. It's great to be doing it at this moment in time. So Ed, I'm going to ask you in a minute to say a little bit about what the next steps are in terms of, because this is not a scheme that is going to planning right now, so what the steps are that might be before that. But Nigel, you've got a great question, which is just, I'm going to summarize it as, how do you pick plants? How did you go about kind of thinking about planting, or a different type of planting in Grosvenor Square?
Well, look, I think the main point to say is that this is still consultation. We're still getting ideas. We're still discussing. So we haven't really gone down the route of choosing the plant yet. So that's the next stage, really. But I think there's a whole range of things that come into this. There'll be some historic references, of course, you know, to the things that Cordula talked about, this early origin of a wonderful garden in Mayfair, and maybe we'll have some heritage references to the planting. Of course, we'll look at a lot of native plants. That's really important, that we have some rooting in place. I think the most important thing, though, is sustainability, and spectacular sustainability, and therefore it has to be the right plant, right place to conditions, that doesn't need a lot of water, doesn't need a lot of extra resources to go into that. We tend to work with plant design, plant communities, so mixtures of plants which really work together to give a whole impression rather than focusing on the individuals. And I really just come back to some of the points we were making. The plant selection really has to be about planting that works really hard all the way through the year, to not just give human delight, but delight for people. And as with everything else, this is all contradictions, and it's all about really finding our way through all of this. So not a perfect answer, but we're still at the very early stages of this, and these discussions are feeding into what the plant selection will be.
I'm going to squeeze a really quick follow-up question to that, which is, you know, I guess because you've done the kind of planting or work in the Olympic Park, I think that those, you know, they're both in London, which means that they're going to be the same, right? So I guess it's like, how do you, you know, you don't approach it in the same way, or maybe you do, but can you say a little bit about whether it be similar or different?
Different for definite. I think every project is different, and it would be very unfortunate if it was just a replication of something else. I mean, it's interesting, just to come back to some previous points, when we were building the Meanwhile garden, some people of course said, you know, we don't really want any change, it's lovely as it is. And of course I fully understand that. Much larger number of people were saying, this is fantastic, this is just what the square needs, we need to see more planting, we want to see more variety, we want to see more life. And that was really encouraging to me, that the very fact of putting more diversity into the square in whatever form was kind of overwhelmingly popular just to people walking by in those times that I was there. But I think, to answer your question, Catherine, this is very much a bespoke response. And I think the combination of having the guarantee of really high quality maintenance, the quality of thinking that's gone into the scheme, and the opportunity to do something really different means that this will be something quite unique. And I don't think you can compare it with anything else.
Thank you, Nigel. That's really useful. Going to draw us to a close and just get a slide up to promote some of the activities that we've got going on. But just before we do that, Ed, can you just say a little about the next steps, I can also join you in this, but the next steps after this, before something, this is not a scheme that just gets submitted to planning.
No, not at all. So I guess, this is, these are the developing design ideas, and they're called that because, we're sort of starting to coalesce around a set of ideas that seem to be responding to the community priorities. We're absolutely not saying that we've got everything right. And I think, all the feedback that we're collecting over the next month or so is going to help inform us as to where are those particular areas where we need to do more talking, we need to learn more, we need to understand how we get some of this stuff right. So what I'm kind of expecting is that kind of as we get into November, we'll probably start identifying what are those specific topics where we need to have more detailed conversations. And I guess we'll be reaching out to the community again to try and have some of those detailed conversations about how we kind of address specific issues and how we kind of evolve the design in those ways. That I expect is going to kind of run over most of the winter, and then as we get to the spring, we'll be kind of taking all the feedback we've had from this stage more broadly, but also in those kind of really specific areas, and kind of putting together what we hope will be kind of the sort of the final design ideas for another consultation in the kind of early spring. And that'll give us a chance to do some final changes and stuff like that before getting towards a planning commission. That's the hope anyway. I don't know, Catherine, have I got that right?
No, I think you got that right. Well done. You have passed the test. And I would say that safety, for example, like if I'm looking at the chat, I'm looking at some of the conversations that we've been having, that, for example, we might not title it just safety, but this notion of, how open or enclosed things are, and views across, and boundaries and opening times. And that might be some of the detailed conversations that we want to be having over the late autumn and winter to make sure that we get those things right. And I think, one of the challenges of bringing work out earlier than people normally might in a project is that we don't, not everything is resolved. So it's a good thing because it means there's room for influence, but it also means that we don't have all of the answers. So I'm just going to ask somebody to put the slide up for me. Nicoletta, please, if you could pop a slide up for me just so I can do a little bit of promotion. Because we have a exhibition running live in the square at the moment. I know some of you have been along to see it. It's open until the 19th of October, so you can see it with or without us, but it's going to be staffed on 3 more occasions. So actually it's open to the 20th of October. So the 6th of October between 3:30 and 6:30, it'll be staffed by the team. 13th of October between 11:30 and 2:30, and the 20th of October between 11:30 and 2:30. Then we have themed walks that are going to be happening. So Cordula is running one next Tuesday between 4:30 and 6 in the square. These are going to be socially distanced, limited numbers. So please do book in advance so that we can make sure that we can do it safely for you and for us. Planting in Trees, which is going to be led by Nigel, is on the 13th of October between 12:30 and 2. Definitely book for that. He is popular. Ecology and Wildlife is going to be led by Georgie Nibs, who is going to be who's the ecology consultant, and that will be between 12:30 and 2 on the 20th of October. And then we have 2 more play workshops that are running Tuesday the 15th, Thursday the 15th, sorry, and Tuesday the 27th, which is in half term, which is why we're doing it outside of the actual programme, but we wanted to make sure we were doing something in half term. And then please do go online to the website. You can listen to an audio tour and then give feedback, and there's some links here. I think the links are also in the chat channel. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you to our panel for sharing and talking about the ideas, but also answering your questions. Thank you, everybody, for answering your questions and generosity of giving feedback. We really appreciate it. So I think Nigel's just put something in the channel if people want to pick that up from him. But yes, thank you, everybody. This has been really interesting, and please do continue to stay involved.